My dad had a voice made for courtrooms. Deep, measured, the kind that made juries lean forward. When he used that voice on me, I felt it in my chest. You want to leave Vanderbilt Law to bake bread for strangers? That's how he said it. Not open a bakery. Not even run a food business. Bake bread for strangers. Like I told them I wanted to juggle on street corners. I was 26. Third year of law school. My bar prep books were stacked on my desk in the order my mom had organized them. Torts on the bottom, con law on top, a color-coded study schedule she'd laminated and taped to my wall. She'd driven 3 hours from Nashville to do that. She brought a casserole, too. I had told them over dinner. My mom, my dad, my older brother. Home for spring break, sitting at the dining room table where every important conversation in my family happened. The table where my brother announced he made partner at 31. Where my dad told us he'd been appointed to the federal bench. Where my grandmother's hands shook when she served the rolls and nobody mentioned it because we were all pretending she was fine. I'd rehearsed the words in the car on the drive home. I was going to be calm, logical, present my case like the lawyer they'd raised me to be. Instead, I just said it. I'm leaving Vanderbilt. I want to open a bakery. My mom set down her fork. My brother said, "Is this a joke?" My dad waited. He had a way of waiting that was worse than anything he could have said. I told them about the farmer's market I'd been going to every Saturday for 2 years. About the bread I'd been baking in my apartment kitchen at 5 in the morning before anyone else was awake. About the woman named Connie who ran the booth next to mine. I'd started sharing her space just to test the market, nothing official, who told me last month I had the best sourdough she'd ever tasted and that people were lining up. About the $3,400 I'd made in 4 weekends. About how, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was drowning. My dad listened to all of it. Then he said, "That's a hobby, Sloan. Hobbies don't pay mortgages." Sloan. My name from my dad meant something. He only used it when he was done treating me like a peer. I said I thought it could be more than a hobby. I had a business plan. I'd spend 6 months on it. I'd talk to a small business development center advisor. I had projections. My mom said, very quietly, "We didn't pay for 3 years of law school for you to make sourdough." My brother didn't say anything else. He just looked at his plate. My dad stood up. He didn't clear his dishes. He just stood the way he did in court when he'd heard enough. "If you walk away from that degree," he said, "you walk away from this family's support. I mean that financially and otherwise. I will not fund a choice I believe is going to ruin your life." I said I wasn't asking him to fund anything. "Then you have your answer," he said. He went to his study. My mom followed him. My brother looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You should sleep on it," and carried his plate to the kitchen. I sat at the table alone for a while. The casserole was still in the center, half eaten. My mom's laminated study schedule was upstairs on my wall. I drove back to Nashville that night instead of staying the weekend. I gave myself 2 weeks to be sure. I wasn't impulsive. I never had been. That was the part they didn't understand. They thought this was a crisis, some breakdown from the pressure of law school. It wasn't. It was the calmest decision I'd ever made. I withdrew from Vanderbilt on a Tuesday in April. I moved out of my apartment at the end of the month because the lease was up and I couldn't afford to renew it alone. I had $11,000 in savings, a 2014 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it, and a KitchenAid mixer my grandmother had given me when I turned 20. I moved into a studio in East Nashville that had a gas oven and 1 window and cost $875 a month. I called my parents to tell them I'd actually done it. My mom answered. I heard my dad's voice in the background asking who it was. She told him. There was a pause. He didn't come to the phone. My mom said, "I hope you know what you're doing," and then said she had to go. That was March of 3 years ago. Here's the thing about starting a food business that no one tells you before you do it. It will humble you in ways that have nothing to do with the food. The food was actually the easy part. The hard part was the commercial kitchen rental at 4:30 in the morning because that was the only slot I could afford. The hard part was farmers markets in February when it was 31 degrees and my hands went numb through my gloves and I made $200 on a good day. The hard part was applying for my cottage food license, then my full food handler's permit, then realizing I needed a business entity, an LLC, a separate bank account, a sales tax ID number, a liability policy, all of it stacking up while I was also trying to sleep and also trying to bake 8 dozen loaves a week. The hard part was calling my grandmother because I needed to hear a voice that wasn't going to tell me I'd made a mistake, and trying not to cry while she asked how I was eating. The hard part was the day my car needed $1,800 in repairs, and I had $2,100 in my account, and I sat in the parking lot of the mechanic and did the math 3 different ways, and every way came out the same, but the mornings were mine. That part was real. 4:30 a.m. in a commercial kitchen that smelled like other people's food, measuring flour by weight because I'd learned that volume measurements were for people who were okay with inconsistency. And I was not okay with inconsistency, folding 11 that I'd been feeding for 8 months. Watching dough transform under my hands into something that would make someone's Sunday morning feel like it meant something. I know how that sounds. But bread is one of the oldest things humans make for each other. I didn't think that was nothing. I started a wait list for custom orders in month 4. By month 7, the list was 6 weeks long. I hired my first part-time help, a culinary student named Bianca, who could shape a petard faster than anyone I'd ever seen, in month 9. I applied for a Nashville Entrepreneur Center small business grant in my first year. Didn't get it. Applied again the second year. Got $15,000. Then I applied for an SBA microloan. Got $45,000. I found a space in a neighborhood called Wedgwood, Houston, that had been a print shop, and before that, a dry cleaner, and before that, something nobody could remember. It had the bones of something good. High ceilings, south-facing windows, a loading dock in the back. I signed the lease on a Thursday in October, sat in the empty space on the floor with a thermos of coffee, and cried for about 20 minutes. Not sad crying, the other kind. Harvest and Proof opened 8 months later. The Nashville scene ran a piece on us 6 weeks after we opened. Not a huge piece. A little box in the food section. New openings worth knowing. But they called our country ham and Gruyere pull apart, the best thing we've eaten in a bakery in 2 years, and the next Saturday we sold out by 9:15 in the morning. The line started before we opened. I stood at the front window watching people queue on the sidewalk in the November cold, and I thought about my dad's voice. Bake bread for strangers. Yes, exactly that. By the end of our first full year, Harvest and Proof had $340,000 in revenue. I know that sounds like a lot until you understand bakery margins, which are brutal, and build out debt, which was real, and the fact that I paid myself $38,000 that year because everything else went back into the business. But the business was alive. The business was growing. We had a wholesale account with 3 restaurants and a hotel. I was telling the truth when I said I had projections. In year 2, a hospitality group out of Atlanta called. They'd heard about us through a chef they worked with. They wanted to talk about a partnership. A Harvest and Proof outpost inside their new boutique hotel in Chattanooga. I drove down to meet them on a Tuesday and drove back with a letter of intent. I didn't tell my family any of this, not because I was hiding it. Just because there was no line of communication open, my mom texted me on my birthday, I texted back. My brother sent a gift card to Amazon at Christmas, the same amount every year. The kind of thing that means he thought of me for 30 seconds. My dad said nothing at all. My grandmother called. She always called. She told me she was proud of me even though she didn't fully understand what I was building, and that was enough. The Chattanooga partnership closed in the spring. The terms included a licensing fee and a percentage of revenue from the outpost. It was the kind of deal I'd had to learn to understand from scratch. I read every line of that contract myself, which took 2 days, and then had a food business attorney review it, which took another week and $1,500 I winced about but knew was necessary. The initial licensing fee was $280,000. I want to be precise about this because precision matters to me. Not $280,000. $280,000. I paid off my SBA loan the following Monday. The Chattanooga location opened that fall. Within 4 months, it was profitable. The hotel started referring guests. We were moving 400 units of packaged goods, jam, cultured butter, granola, through their gift shop every month on top of the cafe service. A food and beverage investment firm contacted us in January. I will not bore you with the details of what followed because it took 11 months and enough paperwork to fill a filing cabinet. What I will tell you is that we closed a deal that valued the Harvest and Proof brand, the Nashville flagship, the Chattanooga outpost, the wholesale accounts, the packaged goods line, and the licensing framework at $4.2 million. I retained 60% equity. The investment brought in operational capital, a growth team, and a path to 3 more locations. My net from the transaction was just over $1.6 million. I bought a house in East Nashville 3 weeks later. Craftsman Bungalow, 1924, on a street with oak trees so old they've lifted the sidewalk, original hardwood floors, a kitchen with a 6-burner range and enough counter space to actually work, a front porch where I drink my coffee every morning and watch my neighborhood wake up. It cost $810,000. I paid cash. Here's what happened next, and I want to tell it the way it actually happened, not the way it sounds in my head when I'm feeling generous. My brother texted me in February. He'd seen the Nashville Business Journal piece. They'd covered the investment round, named the valuation, included a photo of me in front of the original Wedgwood, Houston location. My brother texted, "Wow, didn't know things had gotten this big. Really proud of you." I stared at that text for a long time. I didn't respond immediately. He followed up 2 days later. "Hey, is there any chance we could catch up?" "Been a while." I said sure. We had coffee. He was pleasant. He asked about the business in the way people ask about something they should have paid attention to earlier and are now trying to catch up on without showing that. He told me about his firm, his cases, his new apartment in Brentwood. Before he left, he said, casually, "The way you say something when you've been working up to it, Dad's having a rough time, by the way. Some investments didn't land the way he expected, just in case you'd want to reach out." I nodded, said I appreciated him telling me. I thought about my car in the mechanic's parking lot. The math I did 3 different ways. I said, I hope things turn around for him. We hugged outside the coffee shop. It was genuine on my part. I do love my brother. I just see him clearly. My mom called me in March. This was the first time she'd called, not texted, called, in over 2 years. She asked how I was. I said fine. She asked about the business, and I told her it was going well. There was a pause where I could hear her deciding something. She said, "Your father, he's not going to ask you himself, but things are tight right now and we were wondering." I let her finish. She was asking if I could help cover some of their expenses for a few months. The federal judicial salary my dad drew was good, but not lavish, and some private investments had gone badly, and there were some credit obligations that had become uncomfortable. She said she knew it was a big ask. I sat with that for a few seconds. I thought about the dining room table, the laminated study schedule, the casserole left half-eaten because everyone followed my dad to his study, my mom's voice on the phone, "I hope you know what you're doing," my dad's voice not coming to the phone at all. I said, "Mom, I love you. I'm not going to be able to help financially." She was quiet. I said, "I think you and Dad are capable of figuring this out together. A judicial salary is real income. A financial advisor could help restructure things." She said, "Sloan, I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. I really am not. But I built what I built alone. I need you to understand that. Not to punish anyone, just because it's true. She didn't say much after that. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes talking about nothing. Before we hung up, she said she was glad I was doing well. I believe she meant it. My dad has not called. I want to say something about what I've learned, because I think it matters more than the money. My parents are not villains. I've spent time making sure I'm not turning this into a story where I'm the hero and they're the obstacle, because that's not honest and it's not fair. They believed what they believed about stability and risk and what a life should look like. They passed those beliefs down the only way they knew how, with certainty, with authority, with no room for anything that didn't fit the shape they'd drawn. They were wrong about me. But being wrong doesn't make them villains. What I know is this. I had one life that was chosen for me, and it was making me disappear slowly. And I had one life I chose myself, and it nearly broke me in year one, and it is the best thing I have ever done. The bread that started all of it, the sourdough that the woman named Connie said was the best she'd ever tasted, I still make it every Saturday morning, not at the bakery. At home in my kitchen, in the house with the oak trees and the lifted sidewalk. I put on music and I take my time and I don't rush any of it. Some mornings I think about my dad's voice. Bake bread for strangers. I set 4 loaves on my front porch last Sunday. Left a little sign, free. Take one. They were gone in 40 minutes. I watched from the window while I drank my coffee. Bake bread for strangers. Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing, and I would not change a single thing. I've thought a lot about what actually happened to me, not the version I used to rehearse in my head at 4:30 in the morning while the dough was rising and I was too tired to be careful with my own thoughts, but the real version. What happened was this. Every person in my life who was supposed to know me best looked at the clearest, most honest thing I'd ever done and called it a mistake. And what I had to figure out alone in a studio apartment with one window and a mixer my grandmother gave me was whether I was going to let their certainty become mine. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell these kinds of stories. It's not the money. It's not the valuation or the investment round or the house I bought with cash. It's the 2 years before any of that, when I had nothing to point to except what I felt in my hands at 5 in the morning when the dough came together right. And I had to decide, every single day, not just once, that was enough to keep going. My dad is a smart man. My mom worked hard her whole life. They did not set out to diminish me. They set out to protect me in the only way they understood, which was to hand me the map they'd used and trust that it would work for me too. When I didn't take it, they couldn't interpret that as anything other than recklessness. That's not cruelty. That's a failure of imagination, and it's a very human thing to have. But here's what I've come to understand. The consequences of their certainty landed on me, not on them. I was the one who drove back to Nashville alone on the Sunday night. I was the one who did the math in a mechanic's parking lot with $2,100 in my account. I was the one who had to rebuild my sense of what I was capable of from scratch, without anyone in my family watching or believing or asking how I was doing. And then, when it worked, they came back. My brother with his "really proud of you" text, my mom with her phone call after 2 years of silence, suddenly interested, suddenly present, suddenly needing something. What I've learned is that cause and effect is not poetic. It's just true. The choices you make when no one is watching, the work you do before anyone cares, the discipline you hold when you are exhausted and scared and not at all sure it's going to work. Those things accumulate. They compound. They become, eventually, the life you're living. And the same is true in reverse. The people who chose not to show up when it was hard do not automatically earn a place at the table when it gets easier. That's not punishment. That's just how things work. I am not a better person than my father. I am not more deserving than my mother. I just made different choices and I held them and they led somewhere real. Sloane still bakes sourdough every Saturday morning. Not for the business, for herself, and for the strangers on her street who take a loaf from her porch and probably never think twice about where it came from. That's fine. It was never about credit. It was always about the thing itself, the work, the craft, the small and daily act of making something good and putting it into the world. That is the whole lesson. I'm not sure I can say it any simpler than that.